Welcome, everybody, to this second edition of our new InIIS InSIGHTS podcast. My name is Karadag, and I'm the academic director of the Institute of Intercultural and International Studies at the University of Bremen. And I will moderate today's session and will lead you through our talk of the day. To start, I am, on the one hand, very saddened that we have to deal with today's topic. And today's topic is the Ukraine war of these past weeks and the ongoing Russian military invasion into Ukrainian territory, which came with the drastic escalation of armed clashes, the indiscriminate bombardment of also civilian facilities in urban centers. And as usual in war, this comes with high numbers of military and civilian casualties, with physical destructions, but also with widespread despair, and this in the form of the flight of already up to several millions of Ukrainians who so far made it mainly to neighboring countries like Poland and Slovakia, but also with some of these new refugees making it into German cities. On the other hand, I am very happy that we have with us today Elizaveta Gaufman, who is no stranger to us in Bremen. Lisa was a postdoctoral researcher at our institute from 2016 to 2019. And since then, she has been assistant professor of Russian discourse and politics right across the border, not too far from here at the University of Groningen. And we think it is fair to say that we could not think of anybody better to talk about and learn from and discuss the nature of this Russian attack on the Ukrainian state 1 month ago. Lisa has published several fascinating articles and books about what we finally see unfold here in this war. Let me only briefly mention a couple of these publications. One article is called Putin's Pastorate, Post-Structuralism in Post-Soviet Russia from 2017 in Alternatives. Then a chapter called Money Can Buy It, Everyday Geopolitics of Post-Soviet Russia. And then one article with a quite irritating title, namely Eating Identity, Theorizing the Everyday Foreign Policy Assemblage, just from last year in the Global Studies Quarterly. And then, of course, worthwhile mentioning is her 2017 book, Security Threats and Public Perception, with Palgrave Macmillan, and fresh off the press, Everyday Foreign Policy, Performing and Consuming the Russian Nation After Crimea, published by Manchester University Press. Beyond these,
not published yet, but it's in production, so coming at some point.
Some point, fresh off the press. And beyond these, Lisa is a regular contributor to the Duck of Minerva, and we really suggest you read her work. And yes, you should surely also follow her on Twitter to always be better informed about the war, about Russian politics and society, and definitely, of course, of Foucault and post-structuralism. Lisa, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for inviting me, Roy, and it's nice to be back in Bremen, even virtually.
Great. Now, as you always hear before such a talk really begins, there is you hear this caveat that there could be so much more to unpack, that there are so many themes, so many issues of domestic, of regional, of international politics that one could debate with respect to this war, so many themes in everyday political and academic discourses on the place of Russia in the world of today, on the nature of war in the 21st century, the power of deterrence vis-a-vis diplomacy, or deterrence with diplomacy, the art of the deal, so to speak, in international negotiations, and then up to questions like the decline of the West, IR debates, the place of realism, and what have you. And of course, we can only touch upon a couple of these issues and themes. So let me start maybe with that sense of disbelief and despair of those first hours and days of the invasion 4 weeks ago. Now, for those of us who have had their own understandings and ideas of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict of these past years, the war definitely came as a shock, as something totally unforeseeable, despite all the evidence handed for months by the US, the UK, and East European governments that all that military mobilization at the border would certainly lead to a full invasion. Now, my first question would be, how was that for you? For you, with all your expertise and all the knowledge that you had just assembled for the Everyday Foreign Policy book, for example, which I guess captures the Russian-Ukrainian tensions of these past years. So how did what you know about all this prepare you for the 24th of February?
I have to say that most of analysts and myself included, we did not expect this scale of invasion. And I think that a lot of people, even until the last moment, they were saying, oh, this is just bluffing. Putin is bluffing. He's not going to bomb Kiev, which is like the most ridiculous claim if you think about it from a Russian perspective. How can you possibly bomb Kiev? Kiev is the mother of Russian cities. So this is like something you learn in school in Russia. So you cannot bomb the mother of Russian cities. So that's why, from a cultural perspective alone, this was so unthinkable for so many people in Russia, and especially Russia specialists, that it was very hard to believe that an invasion of such scale was actually going to happen, despite all the military buildup on the borders. And when I heard Putin's speech about recognition of Donetsk and Luhansk republics on the 21st of February, this is when I actually got scared. So this is when I realized, okay, this is the war is coming. So and that's when I started to freak out, and I even had to I communicate with several of my friends as well in Ukraine about this. So because the kind of language that he used in his speech was very much reminiscent of the language that was used in 2014 before the annexation of Crimea and before Russian military involvement in Donbass that was that happened shortly after. So, and when you hear this kind of rhetoric, it's usually a very clear indicator of some kind of military involvement. And the specific rhetoric I'm talking about is this probably surprising claim for somebody about the denazification of Ukraine. And this is a very long-standing claim that the Russian government has been making about Ukrainians specifically, and about Ukrainian government in particular, about the fact that what happened during Euromaidan, they considered a fascist coup d'etat. And then the government was taken over by far-right groups and neo-Nazis that were hell-bent on killing all Russian speakers in Ukraine. So this was pretty much the motivation for Crimean annexation and then the involvement in Donbass as well. So this is kind of a classic securitization framework. And the reason that it works so well in the Russian cultural sphere, also among some Russian speaking Ukrainians as well, is because the memory of World War II in Russia is extremely traumatic. It's one of the most consensus building memories that you have in contemporary Russian society. So this is one thing that like 90% or maybe 99% of the population would agree on, would be the fact that Russia, Soviet Union at that point, saved the world from Nazis. And this is a very reassuring, very positive identity building narrative that exists in post-Soviet space. So whenever you want to, the reason that the Russian government was using this narrative to manipulate the population into believing that Ukrainians are Nazis, because they know that it would resonate really well with the Russian population, and it did. Especially if you take a look at the kind of public opinion polls from 2014, 2015, you can see that there's a really wide-ranging support for the annexation, for Putin personally as well. So there was a so-called Crimean consensus where people were on board completely with the annexation. The problem, however, is that it does not just come with this whole idea of Ukrainians and Nazis, which is, of course, ridiculous, especially if you take a look at the election results in Ukraine proper and the actual relative power that neo-Nazi groups actually have in the Ukrainian government. It's very minuscule. So obviously it's not a Nazi state. Just wanted to make that clear once again. But unfortunately, this is what a lot of people in Russia believed and still believe. So we still have pockets of the Russian population that do call Ukrainians not Ukrainians, but they call them Ukrafashisты, so Ukrainian fascists. They call them Banderovцы, which is the term for the followers of Stepan Bandera, so a Ukrainian nationalist who fought with the Nazis and participated in Polish and Jewish pogroms during World War II. So this kind of reference to Bandera in the first place is a very World War II heavy reference, of course. And again, this creates this kind of neo-Nazi Ukrainian connection in the minds of Russian speakers. And that obviously makes it very relatively easy to manipulate the population into believing that certain extraordinary measures are necessary to save Russian speakers or even Russia proper from this neo-Nazi threat that is emanating from Ukraine. And another problem here is also that it seems that Putin and a lot of political elite in Russia actually have this very colonial and racist assumptions about Ukraine and Ukrainians proper. So they don't consider Ukrainian language as an actual language. They don't think that Ukraine as a country actually should exist. There are a lot of, this is also something that Putin openly said during his infamous speeches over the last couple of weeks, and also that Ukraine was created by the Bolsheviks, that Ukraine never existed in its current borders. And this is something that we've been hearing since 2013, or even if not since 2004, since the Orange Revolution. So the Russian government has been consistently trying to delegitimize Ukrainian statehood, because they saw it as an existential threat as well to Russian governance. And because, again, whether we talk about 2004, 2013, 2014, and now Putin was still in power. So again, a lot of these narratives are motivated by his own racist and colonial assumptions and imperial assumptions about Ukraine. And that obviously make it to the mainstream TV. So if you compare even the TV coverage from 2014, 2015, and now they're very, very similar. So the one, again, constant narrative that has also been there is also the Save Donbas Children. And this is, again, this was something that's very common in 2014. And now, of course, when people are accused of, like whenever those who are protesting the war are being somehow criticized by the pro-governmental actors, they would say like, oh, where were you for the 8 years? Like you don't care about the children of Donbas and now you suddenly care. So you didn't care about those children. So this is a very powerful narrative, obviously. And there are, of course, civilian and battle-related deaths from the 8-year war in Donbas. But one thing that is being left out there is, of course, that this war was completely sponsored and maintained by the Russian government, that a lot of those commanders and the FSB functionaries who actually, generals that they've been there over these years, they were fueling this war for 8 years.
All right, but despite this acceptance of the discourse, the reactions after taking over and occupying Crimea in 2014 were much different than the reactions across Russia when this war started. So, is there not a division that could help to create some sort of counter narrative to improve the image of Ukraine and Ukrainians across Russian society? What do you think are the prospects of that?
So there is definitely a difference, and one of the ways that the Russian government managed to sell the Crimean consensus was the fact that it was a seemingly bloodless affair. So they kept calling the Russian troops the most, little green men, or polite green men, or polite men, and there were even T-shirts on sale at that point in time. The most polite president, referring to Putin, of course. So the way that it was sold is like it was just a completely harmless, bloodless takeover. Ukrainians wanted, like the people in Crimea wanted to be part of Russia, and they became part of Russia, and like the West can do nothing to change that. So of course, if we compare it to the current situation, there is no semblance of this peaceful takeover that Putin probably had in his mind when they were planning this offensive. And there are just so many casualties, both civilian and military, that it's very hard to it's very hard to not call it a war, even though it's still illegal in Russia to do that. So it's still being called special operation. Sometimes even the officials slip and call it a military operation, but they're technically not allowed to call it a war in Russian media space right now, which is, by the way, very much restricted. So it's very hard to call it a war if you want to. So this is because of this bloodshed that is happening, and because of the many familial connections that Russians have with Ukrainians, and because a lot of visuals that still managed to make it through to the Russian population about the destruction, especially of the seemingly, Russian, what they would call Russian cities like Kharkiv. It's very hard to sell this. Even with this narrative or the narrative urgency that you would have related to the Great Patriotic War. And this is pretty much the main difference, that because there is so much blood, you cannot have the same consensus around it as you did in 2014. It's no longer Russia asserting its great power status. It's Russia attacking the neighbor and then lying about it on several occasions. So the kind of variations of the motivations behind the aggression have changed head-spinningly fast in Russian media. So they started with protection of the Donbas people. Even the Patriarch of Russia even said about, we were trying to protect Donbas from having a gay pride parade. I'm afraid I'm quoting here. So, and then they moved on to things like, there was a preventative war. Then they discovered some kind of fake biolabs. Then there was some kind of bird lab where the birds were supposed to target ethnic Russians with some kind of weapon. So all these ridiculous claims, and again, like the sheer number of them just makes even a regular Russian citizen confused. Like, so why are we there exactly? And again, like, because there was a special operation to protect the Donbas people, apparently, supposedly. Why are Russian troops in Kherson? Why are Russian troops around Kiev? Why are they bombing Kharkiv? So like all of these things make it very hard to be explained, even with the limited, even though this information is technically available to the Russian population through official mass media, because they are reporting some kind of troop advances and stuff. But then even a regular person would be like, well, wait, why are the troops there if we're protecting Donbass, which is not there? So, but at the same time, obviously, there's a massive cognitive dissonance for the Russian population that, a lot of Russians have been raised in this idea of as long as there is no war. So this kind of anti-war ethics, and now there is war. So, and obviously the more comfortable position would be to just pretend there isn't a war. And that actually might explain some of the support for the so-called special operation that you see in Russia right now, because people just have such a hard time reconciling these two things about the country, that they've been raised to believe that Russia is for peace, Soviet Union is for peace, and then suddenly they see that it's not the case. It's much easier to retreat into this pro-governmental narrative that tells you that there is no war. So this is one aspect of it. And another, obviously, you have the pockets of the Russian population that is very much for the war. And this actually is something I discuss in my hopefully forthcoming book on everyday foreign policies, related to this increasing trend of militarization of society in Russia, where you had several technically Soviet-era tricks to involve even toddlers and school children into military exercises, when you had celebrations of Great Patriotic War victory, and you had toddlers and riding in tanks, like the strollers that are made to look like tanks, and then they're wearing military uniforms and stuff like that. So all of these attempts to militarize the society have actually led to a lot of people sort of denying the trauma of the Great Patriotic War, instead looking at it as an exercise in great power making. And that's where, especially in the intensification of this militarization and commemoration of Great Patriotic War, another trend that came out of it was so-called "we can repeat it" narrative. And "we can repeat it" actually was represented by this car sticker that was very popular, where you could see like a stereotypical male figure sodomizing another figure, and one of them has a hammer and sickle, so Soviet Union. The other one is a swastika, which is a Nazi. So, and so this narrative of "we can repeat it" is this kind of ultra-nationalist idea of because Russia became a great power by defeating Nazi Germany, now Russia can prove its great power status again. And this narrative is one of the most toxic and horrifying things that actually came out of the Great Patriotic War commemoration in Russia. And the people who are actually okay with the war are right now, they are also quite comfortable with this kind of Great Patriotic War narrative as well. And this is the part that really scares me, that the more the war goes on, I think that I'm afraid just more people would continue to see Ukrainians in this dehumanizing light and just some kind of pawn in their great power fantasy that they need to distract themselves from the fact that the Russian economy is collapsing and that there are like 4 countries in the world that actually support Russian actions in Ukraine.
So this, I don't know, for lack of words, let's call it reenactment of the Great Patriotic War would then solely be directed against the Ukrainians as the heirs of old Ukrainian Nazism and fascism, or is not the enemy of this new reenacted war Western liberalism, NATO, Europe, Western ideals, etc.?
Well, this is actually a good question, because in fact, Ukraine is not seen as Ukraine, it's seen just as a proxy for the West. And a lot of people in Russia actually see this war, even if they do accept the war that is happening, they accept it as something that was completely provoked by NATO. Even the public opinion polls before the war that indicate like how people were, even independent public opinion polls showed that the tensions on the border were completely attributed to NATO and the West. And so again, both the Russian government and the Russian population do not see it as a war against Ukraine necessarily. They see it as a proxy war with the West and with NATO. And that's why, again, like the support for the war is in fact, is in part motivated by this, let's show the West what we're made of kind of sentiment. And that like nobody tells us what to do. Like they've been always Russophobic, they always hated Russia. So now we'll show them with this war. So they do not, because this kind of side effect of not recognizing Ukrainian statehood, Ukrainian agency, which is again something that also a lot of Western analysts do, like let's say John Mearsheimer, this the refusal to accept Ukrainian agency also leads you to perception of the war and the tension between the countries as a proxy war between Russia and the United States. And that's why Putin was so eager to meet with all these heads of state, especially Biden, because he saw this as, again, his existential struggle of the Russian state against the United States, who's trying to undermine Russia through Ukraine. And that's been the kind of consistent narrative that he's seen since 2004, since the Orange Revolution. And there have been also numerous reports about him being very scared about the Arab Spring revolutions in the Middle East, and apparently the way Muammar Gaddafi was treated made a very deep impression on Putin, and he got really scared by the images of what the mob did to Gaddafi. And that also motivated a lot of this neoconservative and turn in Russian politics specifically, and more and more repression towards independent media that happened after the Russian protest against electoral fraud in 2011, and then the kind of hiccup with the re-election of Putin in 2012. So this something that definitely was a driving force behind it, and a lot of the mainstream media narrative was also surrounded, also around this whole idea of, oh, the West is just trying to undermine all these independent countries because they want to make their pawns, they want to sell their, well, buy their oil or their, whatever they have. And I also remember this quote from 2014, if I'm not mistaken, from Russian mainstream TV, where they're saying like the ultimate goal is the Maidan on the Red Square. They won't stop at Ukraine. Maidan on the Red Square. This is their end goal. And then another one was like Ukraine is just a crowbar to Russian statehood. So this is the way they see it. They do not see it as Ukraine versus Russia. They see Russia against the West.
So what is the place of Ukraine then in Putin's imagination, in these new Russian nationalistic imperial imaginations? What Ukrainian future can there be if they have their way?
It's a really sad question, I have to say, because I'm afraid in Putin's mind, there is no place for Ukraine. Or if there is one, there is only a place for Western part of Ukraine that he kind of considers as this not Russia anyway. And there have also been some leaked maps of Ukrainian partition that we've seen from Lukashenko, for example, or there were some also partition plans that were published by Russian far-right nationalists like Igor Kholmogorov, for example. So you could see this kind of ideas about Ukraine that they had. And I have a feeling that this is actually quite in sync with what Putin thinks of Ukraine. He does not think that there is a state. He does, he did learn in school that Kyiv is the mother of Russian cities, so Kyiv has to be part of Russia. The same applies to easternmost part of it, for the so-called left bank Ukraine, the left bank of Dnieper River. So this is supposed to be part of Russia, of course, according to him. Then Crimea is obviously supposed to be part of Russia, according to him. And then they can sort of leave this westernmost part that used to be part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire to be independent, because that they're not, they don't speak Russian anyway, we don't care about them. So that can remain Ukraine. So this is pretty much the idea that they probably have. And this kind of vision has been pretty consistent with Putin for a while now. And especially with the annexation of Crimea, it's been become more vocal and practical. But also in 2018, there was a new statue that was unveiled right next to the Kremlin. It's a statue of Saint Vladimir, so the Prince of Kiev, who baptized Russia in the 10th century. And it's a statue that stands like it not completely, but it destroys the Kremlin ensemble because it stands on this in this historical place. It was unveiled by Putin and Russian Patriarch. And obviously, I mean, at least for me and a lot of other analysts, we see it, so Putin sees himself as Saint Vladimir, who would bring back Kiev as the mother of Russian cities back to Russia. So this kind of messianic role that he sees for himself is probably something that's very important to him. And also something that, for example, Fiona Hill pointed out is that when you meet with Putin in kind of the official residences, he has several statues around him. And one of them is a statue of Catherine the Great, who acquired all those lands in the first place. And so this kind of continuity, regal continuity, the royal continuity is definitely there. And it's something that, especially given the statue and all of the things that Putin said, it seems like this is what he wants to be seen as the person who brought back Russia to its rightful place as a great power, as the country that brought back Kiev and Crimea back to where they supposed to belong. This, of course, completely misguided, because even the intelligence seemingly that Putin and his cronies had was completely misleading, because obviously Ukrainians have their own identity, they have their own statehood, and it doesn't matter that Ukraine never existed in its current borders. Because if we follow that logic, then let's give Kaliningrad back to Prussia. Oops, Prussia does not exist. So, okay, let's then give back, I don't know, Alaska to the indigenous people or anything else. So this kind of border revisionism is very much, it only supposed to go one way according to Putin. And that's why I also found this speech that was made at the UN by a Kenyan ambassador, who was also talking about that colonial powers decided our borders, but for the sake of peace, we had to keep them. And this is not unfortunately, this is not the thinking behind that Russian political elite and Putin specifically have. They do want to revise those borders because they see them as being imposed by the West or by some kind of historical mistake that Yeltsin committed and stuff like that.
For those, usually for such imperial ambitions, you need enough legitimate local and domestic actors, organizations who do that for you. So I guess the idea was to use and instrumentalize the ambitions of pro-Russian Ukrainian rebels of these last years, but they also probably did not think that this would be a full-scale war. which would make their own political positions in the wider Ukrainian discourse much more untenable. So what can they sell now to their fellow pro-Russian Ukrainians?
Frankly, I'm not sure there's a lot of them left these days. So even those who supported the annexation of Crimea, or then those who supported the recognition of independence of the Donetsk and Lugansk republics, even whatever borders, I don't think any of them actually knew how the full scale of invasion. And I don't think that a lot of people on the ground even knew the full scale of invasion. And looking at the way Russian army is moving along, it seems like because of this disconnect between the decision-making process in the Kremlin and the ground forces, there was not enough information about the scale of the invasion in the first place, at least among the people on the ground. So I think that Putin has managed to create a very, very long-standing anti-Russian sentiment in Ukraine. So I don't know how could have he possibly conceived that Russian army would be greeted with flowers or greeted as liberators, because this is not what is happening. Obviously, Ukrainians are fighting for their land and fighting for their families. So the relationship between Ukraine and Russia is destroyed for many, many years. I have a lot of friends and colleagues in Ukraine who it's painful for them to speak Russian right now, even though they spoke Russian their whole life, because Ukraine is a country of bilingual people. And now I understand that it's hard for them to speak Russian because this is the language of the people who are shooting at them. And this is not going to go away for when hopefully the war is over. And so what Putin has done, he's created, he forged pretty much now a united nation, and the nation united against Russia. And this is a really sad this is so incredibly sad, because there were so many connections and so much common ground that could have been used to foster a relationship between the two countries, two independent countries. But now these connections would be lost for generations. I'm not even talking about the civilian loss, of course. Like, civilian loss, of course, are the most horrible part about it. But also the long-term consequences for the so-called Russian world that Putin has been claiming to protect just shows that this is a colonial and racist project that just sees Russia at the center of it, and Ukrainians and Belarusians as some kind of wrong Russians or colonial subject that needs to tell what Kremlin tells them to do.
You already mentioned that it is this slowly growing awareness that this is indeed a war,
yeah,
and that this war is bloody, it costs Russian lives, etc., is the main reason for the shock among Russian population, and also explains the difference in its reaction when compared to 2014 and occupying the Crimea. What about the economic sanctions of Western countries? Do they play into this, into a potentially growing resentment of this war, or do they merely strengthen the government discourse that, well, we have to stick together because you cannot count on the West? So how does that end up in the imaginations of the people?
I think it's a bit of both, actually. So there is actually a segment of the Russian population that's quite happy that the West is seizing the yachts and the palaces, all this villas on the Lake Como or whatever. So a lot of people are quite happy about that, actually. So finally, those oligarchs, getting what's coming to them. So this is something that they're happy about. This idea of sanctions actually being directed against Russia and the Russian people. So this is something that, again, might strengthen the resolve of those who support the war. And this idea of that Putin has been, nourishing for years, that the West is just against the war, they're all Russophobes and they just want to stifle Russian development. So this is something that kind of also makes the sanctions explainable and understandable in the situation. So because the West has always been against Russia, so now, of course, they are trying to hurt Russia the most. There are certain types of sanctions that I think are more effective in that regard. So for instance, the ones that target military production, because a lot of Russian heavy industry is in fact connected to the Western industry. So you cannot produce even cars in Russia without certain Western parts. So this makes, of course, the industrial production in Russia very tenuous, and millions of people who are employed in this kind of factories, they will lose their jobs potentially. And that might create a massive, massive pool of discontent against Putin, because this is usually the part of the population that actually is for him. That's something that also been trying to cultivate in this his somewhat populist streak. So he had this at some point a re-election ambassador from a factory in Urals, and so this he was trying to cultivate his image of this man of the people. And even though you said that the annoying title about eating identity issue, so but there is in fact this eating identity that he has been voiced just a couple of days when he was talking about that all those people who are the traitors and the national traitors of the fatherland who like their foie gras and oysters. So he was trying to other the people who might enjoy their foie gras if they have access to it, as national traders as well. So this kind of line between us and them also lies in food in many ways. And especially if you take a look at the kind of products that are being now panic bought by Russians, you cannot find things like buckwheat, for example, because this is like the panic food, the comfort food that you need to have at home if there's a crisis and you have food shortages. As long as you have buckwheat, you're okay. So this part of this othering rhetoric that Putin uses very much populist and in some ways dog whistling as well, because in 2014, 2015, especially with the sanctions, what was also forbidden in the embargo that Putin's government actually put was on Western food products, and some part of that was cheese. So you cannot get like Italian Parmigiano or mozzarella or any other fancy cheeses, and this was something that some of the Russian population also saw as a net positive, because a lot of the Russian population never had access to those expensive foreign products. So now nobody has access to those fancy imported products. And now like this is kind of a grand equalizer. So this kind of populist appeals to the population through food have been extremely effective, and they are effective now because Putin again is using them to justify war and justify upcoming repression. Because the point, like he was using rhetoric of cleansing the nation of traitors and using food as a marker of this traitor identity in some way. So I'm afraid that eating identity is important these days as well.
So the image we get here from, I don't know, everyday news coverage on the war is that, at least so far, Putin and his government are very much in control of digital publics and also of those protests of those few protests that we did see. What is your expectation of what kind of protests are more successful than others in stirring Russians up against the official story of this war?
The problem is that the media space in Russia is very much restricted. So a lot of the last remaining independent outlets have been closed. Facebook, Instagram are closed right now. Every single citizen of the Russian Federation actually received an email notification about why Instagram is being closed in Russia. So like even those who don't use it, they received this notification that said that it's supposed to be closed because of the because it violates the 1948 convention, UN Convention against Genocide. And so this is the email that every citizen who has an account with a governmental like e-governing website received. So this narrative of all those Western networks are just trying to genocide Russians. This is the governmental narrative. And right now you have access to Vkontakte and Telegram. So Vkontakte has been quite a popular website. It's actually been blocked it was blocked in Ukraine for a while, but then Zelensky's government actually unblocked it now. So Ukrainians could actually access their Russian friends and tell them about the war, which I think was a brilliant move, frankly. The problem, however, with Kontakte is that it's infamous for its very close cooperation with security services in Russia, which means that if you post something on Kontakte, then the security services are aware of you, or you did something before that's alerted to your existence, then these people are in danger of being repressed and thrown into prison, which, by the way, right now it's up to 15 years in prison. And another network that is popular is Telegram. There actually is already a first case of a Telegram conviction right now for disparagement of Russian armed forces, I think was the formulation. And so Telegram is also cooperating with the Russian security services to an extent, slightly less, at least at this point, than Kontakte, but still cooperating. And it seems like because it hasn't been blocked in Russia, the creator of the network would have probably had some kind of deal with the Russian security services. So, which means that people can be found and repressed. So I think that actually there's a video that came that was released by Arnold Schwarzenegger.
I was about to refer to that as well.
I actually thought it was a really, really well thought out video. So this, I think, kind of hits all the sweet spots for the Russian population. And I was actually thinking that it's too bad that nobody heeded Fiona Hill's suggestion to appoint him America's ambassador to Russia, because I bet that he would have done a much better job than Michael McFaul, because it seems like, frankly, Arnold Schwarzenegger has a better grasp on the Russian society than Michael McFaul, I'm afraid. And his video was actually, I thought it was really effective. And because he's such an icon and the Russian population is just such a, he's extremely known, he's extremely famous. People love him in Russia. He's been to Russia. So he's a really great ambassador to convey this message, frankly. And he also, I think, received released a Telegram version of it, which I think is great, because Telegram, the video can be circulated in Telegram much more effectively, because Twitter is also blocked in Russia. So I think this is one of the best, frankly, ways to reach the Russian public, especially by appealing through this, people who are outside, by people who are outside and who actually have some kind of affinity to Russian culture, because
so ordinary Russians did receive that.
Some of them did, yes. It's circulating right now, yes. So there's also now some activists actually managed to make it WhatsApp sendable. So WhatsApp is also quite a popular messenger in Russia. So if it could circulate via WhatsApp, that would be also really good.
So do ordinary Russians also get those heroic portrayals and self-portrayals of, for example, President Zelensky in the war scenario? So, and what do they think of that? I mean, these are very, quite charismatic portrayals of a normal guy trying to defend his country against an oppressor. So how does that speak to ordinary Russians, you would say?
That's actually quite difficult to reconcile them, because Zelensky is quite famous in Russia, and he was famous, back in early 2000s. I remember him in my school years. I mean, we were repeating his jokes back in the classroom. So he's a very famous guy in post-Soviet space. So people know him really, really well, but they know him uniquely as a comedian. They know him as a comedian, as this non-serious person who's, not fit to run a country. They also know him as a Russian speaker and somebody who's Jewish. And this is also quite important. This is also something that led to this reversal of Ukrainians equals Nazi image that Russians had before his election in 2019, because a lot of people were so surprised by his election, the fact that a Russian speaker was elected, Jewish Russian speaker was elected in Ukraine, who was supposed to be Nazis. I mean, it was so against whatever Russian propaganda was pushing for years that it definitely lowered greatly the anti-Ukrainian sentiment that existed in Russian society. And you can see that also in the public opinion polls. The problem, however, is that right now, because of his sort of unserious image that he has in Russia, a lot of people never even thought that he was a serious president, and they still don't think that he is actually a real president, they call him Zela, which is like Zelensky Zela, like this, some kind of a Western puppet that is doing whatever the West tells him. So this is how they view him. There's nothing heroic about his in the Russian even social media. And even those who kind of accept him as president, they're like, oh yeah, like he's, they all think that he left Kiev. So there was also a rumor that was started by one of Putin's cronies, Volodin, at the beginning, that Zelensky fled Kiev and he's somewhere involved, which probably something they were hoping for, I think. They probably hoped that Zelensky would flee to Lviv and they could sort of establish the Ukrainian government in exile somewhere in the Western Ukraine, and then they could capture Kiev and then, make it the mother Russian cities again. But the fact that Zelensky stayed is, again, very much surprising to a lot of people. So they just either dismiss him as a Western puppet, or there is no image, or they see him as this kind of ultra-militarist Western puppet akin to Poroshenko, because Poroshenko was portrayed very, very negatively in Russian social media as this, revanchist neo-Nazi guy, because he was also very much into this militaristic rhetoric as well.
And I don't know, maybe finally, how would you interpret European Western responses so far to this war? What would be your take on that?
It's hard to assess them, because I'm kind of looking at it again from the perspective of the Russian internal politics. And I think that definitely the Russian government was surprised by the resolve of the European countries, and that everybody actually got together, because a lot of them were hoping for the Putin Versteher, Russland Versteher coalition in Germany that would prevent some of the sanctions, of the more hard-hitting sanctions, from taking place. And obviously they were wrong about it. And this kind of 180 in German foreign politics was, I think, probably especially unexpected in Russia. And this, the breaking of this German-Russian connection was very much painful for the Russian government and the Russian public. Although I have to say that, for example, yesterday when Zelensky gave a speech in German Bundestag, one of pro-Russian commentators was saying, the Nazis applauding a neo-Nazi in Berlin. So he was saying that the Bundestag is full of Nazis and applauding the Nazi Zelensky. So which was, again, like, this is something that some Russians believe. So they think because they are applauding because they are Nazis in Germany. So this is what the narrative is right now, at least. I would actually expect more anti-German sentiment as well, especially given the Germany's role in some of the sanctions, especially the Nord Stream stuff. This would also go together with some of the anti-American stuff as well, but that's been there for years. The fact that the French connection is also quite interesting to watch, because I think that at this point, the French government has not pulled all their companies out of Russia. But I think that what a lot of Russians are talking about right now is also related to the fact that some of the medical supplies are running low, and that Western companies are pulling their medical supplies out of Russia, so hurting regular people. And another thing is also applies to some of the digital providers. So some of the digital providers, for example, have been canceling domain names for people who have whose IPs are in Russia. And this is very counterproductive, because a lot of them are actually oppositional figures. So they're just being swept into this collective responsibility issue. And there's a large part of the Russian population that is definitely against the war. A lot of them already left. So this is like a massive exodus of pretty much, qualified specialists who are leaving Russia in droves. The current estimate, I think, is around 150 to 100,000 people who left. And those are leaving obviously have some kind of savings. They have a profession that they can, they probably know languages. Again, so this is the kind of middle class that was always somewhat skeptical of Putin, but now they're leaving. So not a lot of opposition is actually staying in Russia, because you're risking, very severe punishment for being against the war, for even carrying a blank sheet of paper, for God's sakes. So in that regard, I think that again, Putin's government definitely underestimated the scope and the severity of the sanctions, because they thought they were prepared for the sanctions. They thought it's going to go like Crimea, Crimea 2.0, both military and sanction-wise, but they obviously were very wrong. And I think that now what we should watch is the way the Chinese government handles sanctions, and whether China would actually be a useful conduit for some of the sanction avoidance, and whether Russia would be able to reorient its production more towards China than it was towards the European Union. But it will take a lot of time, because European Union was the main trading partner for Russia, and orienting towards China would take time, and it cannot be done even in a year. So, which means that the economic crisis will be deepening, and it's going to be harder and harder for regular Russians to live in their own country. And it's, again, like a lot of them have zero ways of influencing the change in the government. So this would, again, this is much worse for Ukrainians who are, losing their livelihoods and homes and family members. But it's going to create a devastating effect on the Russian state, the Russian population as well.
Yeah, with this very sad outlook, I suggest we end at this point. I'm sure we'll sadly meet again to discuss how this war will unfold in these next months. Hopefully, it will end sooner than later, and then we can have debates on what it was worth for the political positions of Putin and the opposition and so many other countries. Thank you very much, Lisa, for being with us, for having this talk with us, for informing our listeners, and take care and all the best for these next weeks and months.
Thank you, Roy. Pleasure being here.